Hi listeners, thanks again for joining for another episode in my Ellevate series with your host, me, Becky. In this podcast, we talk about all things women empowerment, challenges in the recruitment industry, career progression, and anything else that is empowering women in business. Thanks for listening, and please remember to follow and subscribe for all updates. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Today I am joined with Jeanine Brockhoff. We've known each other for a few months now, kind of met in Copenhagen at some roundtable networking events, and it's been great to get to know Jeanine in more detail over the last, kind of quarter or so. So today we're going to be talking about the topic of staying true to yourself in the workplace. We'll go into a bit more detail as we go, but yeah, really looking forward to this conversation. I think it's been super relevant recently. I've spoken to a few different people who've kind of gone through similar challenges, and I think today the listeners will be really excited to hear what you have to say, Jeanine. So thank you so much for joining me. Really looking forward to this. Do you want to maybe start out and give everyone a bit of an introduction on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. So my name is Jeanine. I work as the Vice President of People for a company called Corti. And Corti is an artificial intelligence scale-up that is disrupting the future of healthcare, which is also makes it so exciting to work there. I myself am from the Netherlands, and I have a background in business and development studies, a Master's of Science in that, and then a double Master's in management. I have worked many years in consulting, mostly focusing on how can you transform organizations and the way that they operate. And I've done this mostly for tech companies. And what I find really rewarding mostly is looking at the intersection of humans and innovations and how people make decisions. And right now, I'm very lucky to lead a talent and people function at Corti, where we get to do that in practice every day.
Amazing. I'll look forward to diving into a few of those different chapters through your career then. So I suppose to start out, when one thinks about their career, it can be kind of wise to consider it like looking through a bit of a kaleidoscope, right? Like having lots of different lenses on at different parts of your career, different chapters, things like that. So I guess it would be good to start out with, what do we mean when we're talking about a career lens in the wider sense?
Yeah, I think it's fantastic that you're asking that. So the chapter piece is actually quite important because often when people think of a career lens, they automatically equate it to a career path, like almost like a linear way of how you go forward, as if there's only one way of doing it. And for me, this kind of thinking already starts in, preschool and primary school when people ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? Not who is it that you want to be when you grow up. So you start thinking there's only, one right answer. And when I have that in my head, this is what I need to do for the rest of my life. The truth of the matter is that it might actually be more like a journey. And we say career lenses is you might indeed have those different chapters in different phases of your life because your priorities will also change. You might get out of school and say, hey, right now, what is the most important to me is learning. I don't really know what it is that I want to do, what it is that I'm good at. So let's dive into this and try that. And I did that myself. I started out in procurement and supply chain consulting because it was kind of the opposite with quantitative data, opposite of what I had done. And I thought, most difficult thing I can think of, let's give that a try. And at that point in time, it was important for me to learn and to grow. Now, maybe later down the line, you might make choices in your life like having kids or you're buying a house where suddenly, yes, growing is still important, but maybe suddenly the financial aspect plays a bigger role. Or you decide you want to do something different. Maybe business wasn't what you wanted to do, and you go back to school to learn a different trade. And none of this is really right or wrong. It just means that you're making choices as your life progresses and go along. And that's why I think the kaleidoscope piece of looking at it from different angles is just fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it gives you that opportunity to, as you said, when you start out your career, you might think it's quite linear, like you only have one pathway, but adding this way of thinking about things and this concept maybe makes it feel a bit more like, okay, there's sideways moves, but they're not necessarily sideways. They're just other things that I could, use and I suppose get into the mindset of like, how are my skills transferable?
Yeah.
what else do I need to add to my toolbox in order to get to that next step, and is this going to get me to my long-term kind of goal, things like that. With assessing strengths and like maybe advantages as well, how do you do that?
Yeah, I think trying something new definitely can help you also discover what is it that you're good at and what is it that you're maybe not that good at yet. There's official tests, but there's also some questions you can just ask yourself. And I'm asking myself, what comes easy to me that might not come easy to others? What do others compliment me on? What I am proud of with myself? What gives me energy when I'm in my flow? And that also answers what my strengths would be and what it is that I can train. And I kind of see them as you have realized strengths and you have potential. And the realized strengths are the ones that you have trained, like a muscle. You also go to the gym to work out. An example I can give here is I do speak a few languages. I don't get there by just one day waking up and thinking, well, I have a dictionary and now I can do it. No, I need to sound like a toddler for about a few months and make tons of mistakes. And then in the end, you get better and better. And for me, it's the same way that it works with different strengths. If it's not something you enjoy, I don't think you'll ever be exceptional at it. You might get good enough, but you might never get exceptional. And this is also why it's so important that you ask yourself, is it something that I'm good at? Is it something that I really want to get better at? And is it something that is also useful to me to spend my time on? That's one way of assessing it.
Yeah, I like those points. And I suppose going back to your other point around thinking about your priorities and how those might change over time, although you might not enjoy one aspect of your job or career at one point in time, if you know that it's going to get you to that next point, it might give you a different way of thinking about it. And actually, yeah, it's not maybe what I'm passionate about, but I enjoy it because it's going to get me to where I want to get to.
Yeah. And you know what? Not all strengths are easy either. So I have one which is called command as part of the strengths finder one. And in my case, it means you put uncomfortable truths on the table. It's the least common there is. It is the least likely to show for women in the top 5. And I would say it's also maybe one of the least appreciated. When you do use this, you have to be very, very careful, like very careful around it. So I think also think about the things sometimes where you're good at something that might actually be something you haven't really discovered as a strength, which you still might have.
Yeah, I like that. Is that it's kind of like having a secret weapon, I guess.
Exactly.
So command, for example, would you say that comes naturally to you, or as you say, it's a strength you have worked on over time?
I think it's something that comes naturally to me. The way that I've worked on it is kind of polishing it a little bit like a diamond. A strength can be something, if you use it in the right way, they can call it the balcony. You can also fall into the basement, which means you're not using it to your advantage. So with this one example, speaking uncomfortable truths, one thing that I think about is assess the impact that you want to make. I make sure that it is, constructively done, and then I pick the right timing. And it also means that not everything that I think should be put on the table. If I were to do that in my people function, I might have really, really bad results. So doing it constructively in a people function is super important. But it's something that I've also learned over time by making mistakes, saying things that people didn't want to hear. They might have needed it to, but if people don't want to listen, then you can say all you want and it's not going to help.
For sure. And I guess it goes back to your other point around figuring out your other skills. So, okay, having that difficult conversation or the command trait, for example, it might come naturally to you, but you also have to combine that with, I suppose, empathy and curiosity and listening skills and knowing when to use it. So general EQ, right, needs to be high as well. So yeah, it's only so good if you can use it in the right context, I suppose.
Yeah, sometimes not using something can be as important
True.
as using it.
Absolutely. So, okay, going back to the with your career lens on, Jeanine, would you say that your assessment of yourself from the first day of work, so after graduating and starting out your career, has changed to now? And if so, how?
Yeah, I think it definitely has changed. So I think what it has done, it has probably reinforced some of the beliefs in myself. And then it also I've surprised myself in other ways. So I do think that it has fundamentally, as a human, every experience makes you grow if you decide to take the lessons from it that are useful to you, right? And also what is important for me at the start of my career is different now. So certain ways I have grown is I've probably become a bit more calm and patient in situations where I needed to be. I'm very action oriented. So when I see a problem, I want to dive and I want to solve it. And sometimes not taking action and letting others step up might be a really good opportunity. I've become more trusting in my own capabilities. When I don't know the answer, I know I'll figure it out either by myself or with others. And that success also comes from working really hard for what you want, but also from wanting the best for other people. In ways where I probably haven't changed as much is that I still find I underestimate and doubt myself, even though I wish sometimes as much that I didn't do that, but I have to come to accept it, that it's a part of me that's there, is not going to go away. But it's also the part of me that drives me to always be better. It drives me to think through, have I done everything that I could have? Is it really the best that it could be? And use it as a way of always driving forward. So I think that even when there's some things where I kind of wish, okay, maybe I didn't want to have this, how can you use it still to your own advantage?
Absolutely. So a little bit of imposter syndrome, it sounds like.
A little bit, not try a lot.
And then flipping it to your advantage. So yeah, I think it's interesting when you think about as well the context, going back to what you said about priorities in general. Over time, you build confidence in things and you become a specialist at it. But obviously, you've worked in so many different types of environments that you've probably been able to adapt to lots of different challenges. I suppose you probably have developed a bit of a toolbox in a way, like your own style, how you adapt it. What kind of lessons have you learned through these times that you think you can put back into your toolbox for next time, shall we say?
The three things that I think I can apply anywhere is if you have the right mindset, where you can grow from each experience, you will grow exponentially. There's, unlimited growth possible. Human behavior is not logical, but it is predictable. So after you've seen people reacting to situations, it becomes easier and easier to identify why are they reacting that way and what's behind it. And that has really, really helped me also in, change management and how I set things up in the company. And then you don't always have the control of the outcome, but you always have the choice of how you handle your own reaction to it. So even in the situations that I can't control, that has given me this really great, sense of still being in a driver's seat of what I do next. And that also helps me in the situations where I doubt myself.
I like your point around the mindset. I think that these days, it's fair to say like the economy has been crazy. We've had the pandemic. We've got, as you mentioned, like war breaking out in a number of places. And there's a lot of things happening in the world that, we're ultimately obviously not in control of. But every day, everyone has to still go to work or, follow out the projects that they're working on. And it can be extremely tough. So I think having that kind of mindset these days is really, really important. And it can be hard, right? And really interesting what you said about human behavior is not logical, but over time, you're right, it can kind of become more predictable. I guess people will always keep you on your toes. But it goes back to your next point, right? Is then you're in control of how you can plan for those kind of things, or perhaps predict and mitigate any other situations that might come up.
And I got to add to that. It sounds like it always works in theory. It really doesn't. There are definitely situations where I try to tell myself, you kind of control how you handle this, and it still kind of goes off the rails. You always have that, but I think the idea and principle has been very helpful to me.
Absolutely. So you mentioned this colleague or friend, but what advice would you give other women who are perhaps ex-consultants who may be looking to move to the end user side or even change their career totally? I mean, you've gone from supply chain procurement strategy consulting and ended up as a VP of people. So probably not the typical route that someone might take, but what kind of advice would you have for someone who's maybe interested in that kind of thing?
There's probably quite a few points there. I think the first one is do it. Just do it. If this is what you want to do, kind of go for it. Don't let yourself hold back. There is no perfect timing.
Yeah.
So when I went I was quite senior already in my consulting career, and I do advise people that want to go into, the industry, as we call it, to go before they reach that really highest level. Because the moment you reach managing director, it's going to be very, very hard, both financially, but also from a learning perspective, to go into the industry, because there's fewer companies that want to give you that chance. So timing isn't everything, but there is a better and a worse piece to pick. Don't settle. So go for the right level. I've seen many female ex-consultants think, oh, but I haven't done this and I haven't done this, and I don't tick all these different boxes. And what if I don't succeed? Honestly, you know what? If you don't succeed, just pick the highest level that you can, try it out. If you don't succeed, easier to take a step back than to take a step up. And there's no shame in that either. Nobody will ever tick all the boxes, and even if they do, there's no guarantee of success. But everybody will figure it out eventually. And otherwise, I find if I just ask, there's 1,000 people that are willing to give me advice, spar with me, work with me on making a success. And that's just fantastic to have kind of that network. And that network is going to be bigger than you think. I would say that if you do make that jump, be prepared and be excited about the amount of mistakes that you're inevitably are going to make. And it's an exciting thing to do.
Absolutely. And I think it goes back to your point around learning, right? You don't know what you don't know yet. If you are comfortable in a specific industry or a specific company or culture or team, you are going to become an expert in that space. But I guess you always maybe have a little bit of a feeling of what else is there to explore. And I think, gives you that opportunity to expose yourself to more and learn different things that you didn't even know. Probably, I'm sure that happened for yourself as well. So going on to the topic around like maybe diversity, I guess you're familiar with that feeling of perhaps being the only woman at the table or in the boardroom or in the meeting or on the project delivery team. How have you managed to adapt and thrive in those settings?
Yeah, it's really a hard one, because I've indeed been in many situations, whether it was at a client site, or maybe it's the type of companies that I choose, right? Tech companies are generally a bit more male heavy. And then at senior levels, there is globally also about, I think, between 23 and 27% of senior vice presidents would be female. So naturally, you're going to end up in a room where there is more men, and more often than not, they're also going to be white. I think the things that I started to realize is I adapted to feel accepted and hopefully increase my own chances of success, because if it works for them, why wouldn't it work for me? And the truth of the matter is it doesn't. Like, they've also done a study at Stanford where they presented a profile of a person called Heidi and then a person called Howard, and how competent they would be. And the students said, both people seem just as competent, but we don't really like Heidi as much. We do really like Howard, and he seems, like a really great guy to work for. It's the exact same case study, exact same descriptions, but there is a bias where we are punished for the same kind of behavior. Assertiveness in men becomes entitlement in women, and that doesn't allow you to play on the same playing field. So is it hard to stay true to yourself? Definitely. I find myself overthinking in how I come across, in how it is that I act, but there are different ways of working with that. So I've had situations in the past where I would say something in a manager meeting. People would not really react to it or kind of shut it down. And I kid you not, the next time a guy would say the exact same thing, and it is a brilliant idea. And it's super frustrating. But what I started doing is I started getting buy-in in advance. So talking one-on-one with people, making sure they kind of understood, get their input as well. I sometimes ask people for explicit support. I say, hey, look, I want to present this very particular idea at the meeting. Could you back me up? Or could you ask the first question? And another thing that I do is I verbalize emotions. So instead of showing them and saying, this pisses me off, I would say, well, look, X, Y, and Z makes me feel really frustrated. What I need is this, and can we come to that agreement? That means that you have to kind of sit with the emotion and put it out a bit more descriptive, but I do find that it allows you to stay authentic and at the same time be more accepted. So there are some tricks in that. Does it always work? There's times where I felt like I've lost my identity a little bit. And that happened when I started adjusting too much. And ironically enough, when you start doing that and you don't apply your strengths, you also become worse at what you do. And I think that is something that I feel I need to trust more and also feel comfortable in taking up that space. And you know what? I'm not going to be perfect all the time. I'm going to do things that people are not going to agree with, are not going to be happy with, but consistency is really important. So the people that you work with find it the most difficult to work with you if they can't predict how you're going to react. So, which is why also describing emotions works really well, because it's something they can always count on. If one time you express something really radically and become angry, and the next time you become really sad, you become a bit more of a danger and less of a safe zone. And I think by staying more consistent, I felt that I've been able to be more true to myself, but also more true and easy to work with for the rest around me.
Yeah, it's interesting how there's so many things to think about, right? There is this kind of notion of perhaps copying or imitating things that you hear or that you say, because as you mentioned, it went down well with that person before, so I'll kind of emulate the same thing.
Yeah.
And then that kind of obviously contributes, as you said, about the identity around your thought process, and all of a sudden, yeah, you can kind of lose that personal thought process or mindset, just because, you know, everyone else in the room is probably going to agree with that statement, so I'll also agree with it. Or even probably stems into like language or phrases or communication style or even body language, right? I think as humans, we're kind of like pack animals, I guess, so we probably do that a little bit naturally. But I think in the boardroom, it can be difficult to be the odd one out and feel a bit as an individual when the rest of the group aren't on the same one.
Like adjusting is good, right? Where you kind of find kind of a common groove, and every person, if you work in a team, everybody has to adjust a little bit.
Yeah.
But when you're compromising, it is just really bad for business, because one, the company's not going to get the most out of you, really. And two, what if you do have that idea that is the right one to follow for everybody? So you're not only shooting yourself in the foot, you're also shooting the company in the foot at the same time. So I think one of the things I'm working with still now is putting things on the table, maybe 2-3 times, and we talk it over and believing that what I bring has just as much validity. Unfortunately, we're still rewarding masculine traits in business more than we do female qualities, like what's naturally attributed, right? Because there's also men like that, like collaboration versus, assertiveness. But I think part of being in a people team and a VP of people is also great that I can have a first hand in changing that and working with bias and in setting the structures that will actually put people on the same playing field and work towards a more fair organizational environment that is not just tailored to one specific kind of person and way of achieving goals. Because there's many ways that leads to Rome. And that's just very exciting that can be a part of my career trajectory.
Yeah, absolutely. That is super exciting. And I think inspirational to hear, because you are going to have that opportunity to change perhaps the current narrative, and also empower like the diversity of thought. And we all know there's so many studies, right, that it is true that having a more diverse thought process will provide better solutions, provide more efficient processes, things like that, because, well, you have different ways of thinking of it. So let's talk about like your international experience. Obviously, someone who speaks 6 languages, so impressive. You can communicate with so many different people around the world, and you've probably got a greater appreciation for nuances in communication styles than probably some of your colleagues who cannot do that. Have you experienced any biases during your career, perhaps due to being from a different place or not speaking the mother tongue of the country that you're working in or operating in, or the management team that you work with?
Yes. So I've actually noticed in certain situations what is a strength can also be a downfall. Like, um, there's one situation that I was just starting out in my career in a consulting company, and the partner had asked me to write a contract up in Norwegian, and I don't speak Norwegian, never have, likely never will, but I did speak Danish. But my Danish will never be to the standard of having to write contracts in that language. So what I think was misunderstood is that even though I speak it, I cannot work as quickly in a foreign language than I can in Dutch or in English. And Dutch is my native tongue, right? And English I've just been working for so many different years. And if you communicate that in advance, communicate the expectations. Okay, if you want me to write this up, you have to expect it's going to come at 50% quality and it's going to come at 3 times the time duration that it might take somebody else to do it. If that is indeed the trade-off you want to make, happily to go ahead with it. If not, then no. And what I did before, I wanted to be helpful. I said, oh yes, kind of, I'll go for it. So people think, okay, if you can pick up one language, you might be able to pick up another one. Another good example is that I've been very clear about to my boss currently about that we do have different communication styles, which he knows. She's British, I'm from the Netherlands. And there was one situation where she said, oh, I appreciate this is a gray zone, but I would like to suggest that you do X, Y, Z. Me with my Dutch brain, I read, this is ambiguous. You have a choice. Pick whatever way you want forward. And she's like, no, I thought it was really clear. This is your responsibility and expect you to do X, Y, and Z. And we just had to make the agreement. It's like, if you want me to do something that black and white, you have to tell me black and white because I have a hard time reading between the lines.
Yeah.
I think also being aware of your own limitations in those settings can be very, very helpful as much as that you're aware of other people's nuances. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think as a native English speaker, I am fortunate and privileged for sure to just expect that for the most part, anyone I can communicate with business-wise speaks in English. So lucky me. But, you know, I think it's really important if you're not, and especially if you operate in international environments, that you need to take a bit of time to appreciate that. Yeah, as you say, it might take longer. There might be nuances with the communication. Even as you said, that was a great example. It's like, I expect X, you even interpret that differently. And I've had experiences similar with people that I've managed from other parts of Europe or wherever. And the classic British style is to dance around the topic, right? We sort of add all these fluffy words in and think, oh, maybe would you mind, perhaps it would be great if one day, shall we visit this again? How do you feel about it? And it's like, she would just say, Becky, what do you want me to actually do? Because you've taken a long time to explain and I'm not really sure what the outcome is here. Just tell me yes or no. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. So yeah, I think you get to learn a lot about different communication styles. I personally love being able to interact with different nationalities and languages and cultures because I think it's so rich and you learn so much from other people and how they operate. But I think it's super important to be conscious and aware, as you say, that not everyone is going to be at the same page at the same time. And
yeah,
but going back to that diversity of thought, like they're bringing different perspectives. So actually be appreciative of what that could lead to. Also, Norwegian contract sounds pretty tough.
Yeah, it's a different challenge. So we do have in the organization where I work, we've established of course like a diversity and inclusion committee as well, where we also talk about we're a relatively small company, we're growing fast, but we're 30 nationalities, which is super, super exciting, as you say. You have to make sure that people's perspectives are taken into consideration. What might be acceptable in an American culture is not acceptable in the Danish one, and the other ways around. And I find that super interesting. I find it so intriguing that humans with the same words can mean something else in one place versus the other.
Yeah.
And how they can act in different ways. Yeah, that's always intrigued me.
Absolutely. And even just like how they feel as well, right? How those words can leave people feeling. And if you're a manager or a leader, well, you might have to be motivating a team of 10 different nationalities. You're probably going to have to flex your style in different ways to get the best results out of everyone. And I think Yeah, I also find that really fascinating and an interesting topic to discuss maybe next time as well in more detail. Yeah, how do you kind of overcome these challenges when you're faced with maybe these biases of you're from a different country, or perhaps, you know, even unconscious biases where they don't even explicitly think that they're doing this?
Honestly, if you assume good intentions, right, and you stay really curious and state your needs quite clearly, I think you can get such a long way. If you're in a corporate setting, I'm assuming everybody wants to do a good job. Everybody wants to work effectively together. Everybody wants to have a great time. Nobody likes conflict. So if something kind of falls wrong or you don't understand, ask about it. I hear you say this. I'm interpreting it this way. Does that make sense? Is that kind of correct? Or just, I would appreciate it if you do X, Y, Z instead of that going forward. I've always noticed that being falling in, you know, in good ears, and maybe I'm just lucky. When I communicate it, usually what it is that I need, because it's clear, people will give that back.
Yeah.
And when they don't, there's often a reason for it, and then you can follow up.
Sure. Maybe comes back to your strength around command. Like it is your strength around, I know what I want and I'm going to tell people. And if, you know, you have probably an ability to get the result, whereas perhaps somebody who's wired in a different way, who, I don't know if you know about the disc profiling or the colors. So if you're a green personality, perhaps your biggest fear is to upset the room, and you don't want to say the wrong things. Whereas maybe your strength is not worried about, not to offend them, but I'm not worried about the implications of the comment. I need to get this thing done, and I need to ensure, without obviously thinking it's going to be at the detriment of anyone's feelings. But I think the other person is more focused on the feelings of how it might land. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And interestingly enough, from my perspective, I don't want to upset people either. It actually comes from preventing the conflict and putting the building blocks down for a good collaboration. I just guess it's the same aim that you have, it's just different ways of you going about it.
Exactly. Moving on to kind of the last point then, Jeanine. In terms of like yourself, we've obviously talked about how the kaleidoscope, the lens, it's, you know, it sort of changes over time, and, you know, you've probably picked up the things in your toolbox as well over time. But I suppose last kind of question is, do you think you've changed as a person throughout your career, whether consciously or based on your experience, you know, the result of that? Has your perception of yourself changed, if at all?
It has changed. It has changed. I think I've become more patient with myself, and I've become more flexible in accepting that there is multiple ways of solving a problem and looking at what to do next. I think previously I have been very goal oriented, and then when I see something, I kind of go for it, which sometimes has worked out well. But in hindsight, I think, you know, I could have gone about that maybe a bit more diplomatically. So I've really grown in that perspective. I think that is one at least. Another thing is, I used to be so occupied with what was the wisest or best thing to do, kind of the best thing in your mind. As an example, when I got out of university, honestly, I thought I had two options. Either go to a graduate program or go to a consulting career, because otherwise I wouldn't amount to anything. And then you look back and you think, well, you know what? If you choose something you really would enjoy, you can potentially be really good at, I want to add value with, that's a really good way to do as well. So I'm trying to not get as stuck and limited. I think I should, but more what I think would bring value for me and around me. So it's a more compassionate perspective, I think.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's easy to get wrapped up in the kind of race to the top, right, when you finish university. And, you know, probably true that you're not always told all of the options, and you're kind of fed like these you know, okay, go down this track, or, you know, do a vocational thing, or, you know, or you do something completely different. And I think it is interesting these days with you know, more and more tech companies and startups and scale ups that are doing so many different interesting things, you guys included, that there probably is a kind of wider horizon for opportunity for young people. And I think that is an interesting concept. I think you're right that similarly for myself, and like I think when I graduated, it was like, okay, apply to every graduate scheme, and if you don't get on one, then, you know, your degree was a waste of time. And I think, yeah, as you say, easy with hindsight to know, but yeah, there are so many other opportunities, and yeah, maybe we need to be telling the younger generation a bit more about it. But I think they have access in different ways that perhaps weren't there maybe when we were starting out.
Yeah, I hope so. And you know, sometimes patterns only become visible in hindsight. So I noticed in hindsight how much I like problem solving, how fascinated I am by human behavior, and how much I like innovation and new ways of thinking. When you look at the titles of my CV, they might have become obvious, but there is definitely a path that is clear the same things in the same topics that come back in each of the roles that I've done. And sometimes that's also a way that you can learn what to do next.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking back, reflection, basically,
Yeah.
right? Amazing. Cool. Well, look, that was an amazing conversation. And thank you so much, Jeanine. The last question that I always ask is, where is next on your vacation bucket list before we wrap up?
Brazil. I used to live there when I was 18, 19, and 24, and I have a fascination for the country. I've seen most of it, but still not all of it. And every time I'm there, I just feel so happy and energized, and I cannot wait to go back.
Amazing. Where did you live?
Sao Paulo.
Oh, wow. Incredible. Yes, it's on my list for sure. I would love to go. I think the culture seems amazing, food, the music.
100%.
Thank you so much, Nina. It's a really lovely conversation, and looking forward to keeping the dialogue going.
Absolutely. Thank you so much too.